We're getting through the week. We're getting to the week, so tomorrow's Friday. So funny. I see a lot of people still wearing like summer clothes, all of the summer, and there are those who just want fall to happen and wearing sweaters and like yeah. So it's a good mix of this is Portland. This is where we are right now in the world. Yeah, I want to ask how are our people's projects ideas percolating through? We did have your projects to be sent to Ian and I by tomorrow at noon. Many of you have reached out to us as to project ideas. Oh gosh.
We're gonna figure that out. Give me 1 second.
They stand by.
Don't know. That's the first time that's happened.
This is the world that we live in, and technology is trying to live in the COVID world that we were in. And then now
It's the hybrid.
it's a hybrid world. Yeah, so project ideas, I just want to bring that up. If you still have a little bit of a dilemma as to what you want to choose, feel free to reach out to Ian and I and Josh, and we can help you through it. I don't really have a hard deadline at noon tomorrow, but I really would want you to submit it to us. Ian will catalog it and then we'll have it ready. And you could start on the assignments in which you do your research for the next subsequent weeks. Also on the Google Drive, there's a homework folder, and what I put in your homework folder are for each week. And so we've had each of our guest speakers come in, and I asked them what it is. It's like for recommended readings for you. So I really want you to go through it, and I have seen some conversations in the Slack channel with recommendations. So I'm glad that you're utilizing the Slack channel to communicate with each other. There's also one other thing that I forgot to mention, and Judge may not know this, but once upon a time when this class has been in session, I think for the past, 32 years, but I think in the last 8 years, there's a Facebook page that was put together. It's not very popular. You're not aware of this. Dan, are you aware of this? No, there's a Facebook page. It's Portland Traffic and Transportation. I'm one of the administrators on that Facebook page. It's not as active, but I just wanted to put it out there. If you are active on Facebook, you want to communicate with each other and other graduates of this class, it's also a means to connect. So that's one other things I wanted to bring up. The attendance slip is floating around, and I want to remind you about the scavenger bingo game that I had put up at the beginning of class. To just participate, it's kind of a fun way for you to travel around the city, take pictures, and then do a bingo game with that. So I don't think I mentioned it last week as a reminder, but I really wanted to bring it up. So those are the announcement I have for today. Before we start with class and bring up the two cool kids in the back as our guest speakers, does anybody have any questions? Yes.
The bingo game, it said 5 admissions per week. Is that 5 full bingo cards or one line, one neighborhood?
No, it says submission of a photo.
In one photo? Not a whole line of photos for.
You can scatter it.
Oh,
You can scatter it throughout, so you can take photos
different neighborhoods.
of different neighborhoods or different modes and then do a bingo game on that. So I'm not really that strict on it either.
Are these submissions anywhere specific, or are we doing this on our own?
So what you would do is you would download it from the actual homework file here.
And it's just a PowerPoint.
It's just a PowerPoint. Yeah,
And
so you
then
take it.
we're just putting it on our copy of the PowerPoint.
Yes. Yeah, put it onto your folder with your copy of the PowerPoint into your folder, and then we'll assess it after class, towards the end of class.
And then the submission for our project idea goes also in our assignment Dropbox or email it to you.
I would ask you to email it to Ian and I, just so that we have it directly into our email and then we can get it. But you're welcome to also put it in your Dropbox. It's just a catalog for you to hold files. Yes.
Course materials, the bingo,
You help me.
Yeah.
Let us bring it up, just so, remember, and this is kind of a fun thing that we tried out, Dan and Alan. So it's under scavenger hunt. Yeah, so if you look. So it's under course material, scavenger hunt, and here's the game that we had put together.
Instructions.
Those are instructions. Here's the map of the city, and then this is what you would take. You can download the entire thing, but you could take this slide, download it into your folder, and then plop the pictures in there. And if it's easier, you could totally download this and do this by hand too. If it's easier, if you want to do this not digitally.
So
So
do they have to be in, what do you mean by our folder that you guys?
that we created for each of you. Yeah, and those folders are actually private folders, so nobody, right?
Yes, yeah, all the folders with your names on them, only you and us have access to, so.
Yes.
So the neighbors, I went to the last Timbers home game and I started taking, I go, oh my gosh, these are part of the bingo game for the class.
There you go.
So, but I don't know the streets that are involved in the particular neighborhood where Providence Park is. Because I have all but the last two pictures on that. I went crazy. I had I had almost all of those. The only thing I don't have is a walk, you know, the path, walkway. And I did discover that finally. But what are the, if I get close to Providence Park, is that okay? Is that neighborhood you designated?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. And I don't think you need to identify the streets. It's the street. You don't need to identify the street names unless
That's
you
what I
want
thought, but I
to.
wanted to make sure it was within the region or the area that you would have designated on there. So, okay.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Actually, we're happy if it's anything within the city of Portland or outside too. So I think I also said that we're open to any other pictures that you've taken from your past travels. So, yeah. Any questions? Any more questions before we start? No? Okay, so today we're going to talk about transit. So we have our guests from TriMet and also with Streetcar. And this is the first time I'm bringing both of you together, which I think is going to be really cool. Last week, we had a lot of questions regarding transit. So I told the students to hold those questions from Kristen Hall and Margie for this week. So I think we're going to be in for a treat. And I said it was going to be a riveting night for our guest speakers. So I'm just going to let you be the judge of all that. So first off, I'm going to have, can you bring up the? Yeah. So we're gonna, this week also, we're gonna do a break, which I neglected to do last week, so I apologize for that. But we will have Alan Lehto come in and speak for TriMet, on behalf of TriMet, to talk about transit in the region and service planning. And then after Alan speaks, we'll do a 10-minute break, and then Dan Bauer with Streetcar Inc. will come up and share what's been going on with Streetcar. So without further ado, I'll welcome you up here, Alan.
Thank you very much, Ruby. So I'm very happy to be here, and in fact, in 1995 and 1996, I was a master's degree student here at PSU in the urban and regional planning, and in '95 I took this class. So it's been a little while, but I have some familiarity with it, and I definitely have to recommend next week's class, I think, with Steve Dotterer, who had a great history of transportation in Portland presentation that I still remember from back in '95. I want to talk about transit in the region, specifically TriMet, and we'll get to a little bit the relationship between TriMet and Streetcar. Maybe it'll come up in questions as well. Are you advancing, or do I have a?
I can if you'd like me to.
No, I think if you
Arrow
just show me.
keys.
Great,
Yep.
okay. Not that I don't trust you, I just kind of confused. No. Perfect. Okay. So First of all, I'm Alan Lehto. I'm the Director of Business Planning and Asset Management, which actually means that I work on our strategic plan um, and um, and also on something called asset management, which is connecting budget and maintenance and hopefully making smart decisions about them in the long run so that the stuff that we own, the old stations, everything stays in good condition. I've been at TriMet for a long time. I have the past of being the director of planning, both service and capital, and other roles as well. So I'll try to bring a broad perspective. The role of transit in the region, though, and something that TriMet really pays attention to, is worth talking about, especially given where I think you all are probably coming from. This place is special, right? I don't think you've gotten the overall sort of regional planning introduction yet, but this will be the 30-second version of it. This beautiful green oasis in the Willamette Valley where we are at the confluence of the Willamette and the Columbia Rivers is a wonderful place to be for all kinds of reasons. And it is surrounded by like 1,000 miles of mountains, deserts, and salty oceans, right? So this is an amazing place that is really special, and we need to steward it and take care of it. And people have known that for more than 10,000 years. People have lived in this area. They've come to where the rivers come together to trade and communicate and work with each other and live with each other. We didn't treat it so well this past century. And at one point, the shot on the left is from around 1970. Car was king. All the policies were driving towards freeways. They were literally driving towards car ownership and people living in the suburbs. And you got in your car and drove into downtown and parked in downtown and went to work. And then you drove back to the suburbs at the end of the day, and downtown was empty, except for all the parking lots. So this is a real photo. This is the Morrison Bridge, the downtown end of the Morrison Bridge. Parking lot, parking lot, parking lot, I mean, just everywhere, right? And part of the reason that TriMet was formed in 1969 was because the community in Portland, including the business community, went to Salem and said, we've got to do something about this. We need a public transportation system that is organized, that is well enough funded to be able to support a growing downtown and growing communities. And now, not just because of TriMet, but partially because of TriMet, we have something that is a little more livable. There's still a little bit to clean up here. You know, that's not the best use of the center of downtown, and it's not the most walkable space, but a lot has happened. And TriMet, transit, walking, biking, transportation infrastructure that helps guide and encourage development is part of the story that got us from that to that. It's all codified in something called the 2040 growth concept that Metro, the regional government, put together over the course of the last 30 years, really. In the 90s, there was a huge amount of public outreach and engagement and decision-making and looking at alternatives. Should we grow out? Should we grow up? Should we have satellite cities? All these different things. And if you come to Portland and you talk to a planner and they don't show you this map, they're not giving you the whole story, because this encapsulates what we want to do, which is keep the development from filling the valley with suburban development that is unsustainable. Make the centers and the main streets and the corridors more attractive. More recently, I think we've more consciously added more affordable and more equitable, but make it a great place to live, hopefully, in a way that encourages people to stay within those areas so that we keep farms and forest lands. And that came out of, this is a great aerial shot of the urban growth boundary. The development on the left side isn't the best, it's cul-de-sacs, but the farm on the right is still operating, and in most cities, that would not happen. The guy on the left here, if you didn't grow up in Portland and didn't get a planning degree like I did, you may not recognize him. This is Governor Tom McCall from the early 70s, Republican governor, but pushed through a state land use bill that wanted to protect those farms and forests. And the way to do that was to make sure that the cities only grew in places where it was okay for cities to grow, and that the farmers could keep doing their work and the foresters could keep doing their work. There was a little bit less about natural habitat, but that became part of it over time as well. So TriMet, our vision, mission, values is in our business plan. You have either already been sent or you will be sent the link to that on our website. I encourage you to just kind of glance through it. But our mission, connecting people with valued mobility options that are safe, convenient, reliable, accessible, and welcoming for all. And our roles in the region, if you just keep scratching, like if you ask somebody at TriMet, what's the most important thing? They may say, well, ridership. And you ask, well, why does ridership matter? Like, we're not just there to give people a ride around and then drop them back off. What are they trying to do? What are they trying to accomplish? And these are the things that we've come up: support our economy and provide equitable opportunity, jobs, education, anything people are needing to get to. Ease congestion, provide mobility for those with fewer options, whether because of physical challenges or low income or age or whatever. A third of America can't drive and more don't drive. So we have to be there for them. Help shape the future of our region. That's about the development. Where we put service and where we put projects, we get development that looks more like what the communities want in those areas. And then reduce emission and support environmental sustainability. I'm not sure what happened to that. It's really there, I promise. Our system overview is we've got a regional fixed route bus network. We've got the Max Light Rail. We've got little things called community job connectors that make connections to areas kind of on the fringes. We're an operating partner with Streetcar, and we run West Commuter Rail. We have frequent service, which is a subsection of the buses that run 15 minutes all day, 7 days a week. So you don't necessarily have to check the schedule. You can just kind of walk out and catch it. And that's where the majority of our ridership and development happens around those services. The FX, which we just opened a couple of weeks ago on Division Street, and Lyft paratransit. For those who cannot use fixed route transit, we provide that service. Small buses that go and pick you up where you need to be picked up and bring you where you need to go. We offer an honored citizen fare for folks over a certain age, anybody who has a low income below a certain level. We subsidize those fares. If you take a single ride, it's half off. If you're riding a lot, you know, if anybody who ever has bought a monthly pass somewhere, you have to scrape together the money to upfront to buy a monthly pass, and then you got to use it a lot. Years ago, when I worked downtown for a private company, sometimes I would buy a monthly pass, sometimes I wouldn't, because sometimes I'd bike enough that it turned out I was wasting money. Well, nowadays we have something called fare capping, which is you just pay your regular amount each time. But when you hit the monthly amount, it stops charging you for the month. And if you're an honored citizen, yeah, the one fare is 50% off. But if you continue to ride, you get to 28 bucks for the month. It cuts off. So you're saving 72%. If you're riding frequently. Transportation options, we operate the things in the middle, the bus, the train, the paratransit, but we recognize that we work in a very complex system of mobility options, many of which didn't exist before about 2014. And you'll see that embedded in our trip planner. If you go to trimet.org on any device, you can do a from-to trip. You can include, I don't really have it on here, but you can open up the options and include things like, well, I want to include Uber as an option. I want to include biking as an option. I want to include one of the shared scooters as an option. I want to include walking as an option. And all of that allows people to move around the region. We recently rolled this out with a lot more functionality and detail, and we're going to be working on another set of the projects where we hope to incorporate C-Tran and Wilsonville Smart and Sandy Transit. Streetcar has been in there since we started this. So that's an overview of our service. Getting back to how does transit and land use connect, how do developments connect. What we see is if we look in the past, and this is some of what you'll get from Steve Dodder, so I'm not going to belabor this, but some of the best walking main streets in Portland were streetcar streets 110 years ago. The reason they are walkable is in large part because the development at the time assumed that you were more on your feet than doing anything else, and the streetcar would get you longer distances. Yeah, there were some cars, there were some horses and buggies, but it assumed walking and maybe a transit connection. And the development happened along those corridors. So why does Hawthorne look like it does? Why did Division have good bones, even if it didn't stay a walkable shopping street? Why does 21st look like it does? Why does 23rd look like it does? If you peer really closely at this old map of the Portland Transit, Portland Traction Light and Company, Power Company, whatever it was, a lot of those streets had streetcar on them. And that set in place the development quality, buildings that address the sidewalk, sidewalks that are wide enough to walk on, multi-story, multi-use buildings that are great for getting into and out of all day. It's not just housing, it's not just offices, it's not just shopping, it's a mix of all of those. All of those were built by transit and they're great for transit, which is why now our highest ridership bus lines are on these very same streets that originally had streetcar. Even though the streetcars are long gone, the investment in the development is still there, and it makes it more sustainable, more livable, more walkable. Like I said before, though, the other thing that policy has to work on is to make it more affordable and equitable, because it is so attractive that it gets expensive quickly. So shaping the future now, we look at the development that happens around our rail stations. The Max line stations, if you look at an easy walk distance from a Max station, which is a third to a half a mile, 5 to 10 minute walk, that land within that distance of Max stations, so there's about 6% of all the land in the region, okay? 6%, small percentage, not a lot. But 39% of all the housing units built since each one of these lines was constructed is in that 6% of land. So we've got a huge portion of housing going into a very small area, which is great for those people who move there because they have access to transit. It's great for walking and biking because things are closer to each other and you tend to get more walkable development. And it's obviously great for the transit because we get more ridership out of that. The interesting thing is that it's not just transit ridership that comes out of that. This is from, I've got 2 slides on this. It gets to it from 2 different perspectives a little bit. This is from a research study that was done by a professor down at the University of Utah back in 2013, 2014, something like that, looking at the comparison between the West Side Max and the Southwest Corridor, which right now is only served by bus, but some of you may know that was on the ballot for 2020. Did not pass, but I'll talk about that a little bit. Comparing those two, if you look at them before West Side Light Rail was built, the travel behavior, the demographics, everything looks pretty much the same. They're very comparable. A dozen years after West Side Light Rail was built, the travel behavior had changed dramatically. Transit ridership had gone up, but so had walking and biking. And because of the development, destinations were closer. So even people who drove were driving less. So the investment, obviously transit didn't 100% do that. The cities had to come in with zoning and developers had to actually show up, but they did. And the difference in the ability to move around and the livability of those communities was enough so that you see it in the behavior, to the point where for every mile that somebody rides on light rail, there's a total of 3 miles reduced in driving. So it's a triple benefit for having those kinds of investments. This is kind of telling the same story, but on the left is downtown Tigard, where the light rail, if Southwest Corridor ever gets built, will go right on this corridor here. On the right is Orenco Station. The station is right in the center. When it was first built, this was all green field, empty. The first test runs of the West Side Max, you could actually see a cow from the train. Now it's a walkable urban neighborhood. Same kinds of things has happened on the east side, especially in the Lloyd district, but other places, Russellville Commons, Gresham. So that's the kind of the connection between transit and the Metro 2040 plan. And to bring that back, those centers, those corridors, those main streets are where we are a tool to help the region develop in the way the region wants to develop. So we work with jurisdictions to help get them to help us decide where to improve service, to get them to help us decide where to put projects. So the FX bus service that just opened, the alignment was determined in partnership with Metro, the regional government, with the city of Portland, with the city of Gresham, and with the communities along the way. All with the idea of transit can support development, hopefully in ways that people are supportive of. So what's new, the FX is, show of hands, people have ridden on it, or at least know about it. Okay, great. Okay, almost everybody is up for know about it. That's terrific. So this is our first what's called bus rapid transit, or BRT line in the region. There are lots of flavors of BRT. This flavor is an on-street variety, but it has a number of treatments that I'll talk about. And it is the first bendy buses that we've had in 20 years. I'll talk about that real briefly. This is the alignment from downtown on the left to Gresham out on the right. There's a frequent service, a line 20 connection to Mount Hood Community College. But these stations are where that bendy bus serves, and those stations are places that become more attractive as that service becomes more reliable, more frequent, and more attractive because of the buses in the stations. So there are bus priority lanes, things like queue jump lanes, where we just get a little bit of a jump to get around traffic. There are 20, 30, 40 people on that bus. There's one person in each car. Which one do you want to get through the intersection faster? You want the one with a lot of people. You want to increase the throughput of that intersection. That is if you're a planner or a more enlightened traffic engineer. If you're not so enlightened traffic engineer, all you want is cars to move. Luckily, we didn't have to deal with too much of that in this quarter. On the right is what's called a BAT lane, a business access and transit lane, which is basically a right turn only except bus lane, but it recognizes that there are driveways to get into shops and things like that. And this allows us to skip past traffic. There's also traffic signal priority, which TriMet has actually had for something like 20 years, but it was visual based. So there's a little emitter on top of a bus that's putting out a light that we can't see. I think it's infrared, I don't remember for sure. And a receiver on the signal, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. And if it's foggy or rainy, it doesn't really work, and some of them don't work anymore. This is the next generation that is much smarter. All the signals are now tied to the offices of PBOT. They have a central controller. There's wayside communications to the bus that can communicate and say, hey, I'm a bus, I'm running late. Can you do something for me? It goes back to the central controller. Those tell the signals to make an adjustment to get the bus through faster. If we're running ahead of time, it doesn't do that. It lets everything else run so that traffic can get through too. The bendy buses are, like I said, the first one we've had since we bought some in the 80s from Hungary that didn't work very well and were terrible. And it literally took us about 5 years to convince our maintenance team that we should be able to buy bendy buses again, even though every other transit agency anywhere near our size had already been running them. But they're great. They are 3-door boarding now with wide doors on all 3 doors. Those of you who have boarded it see what a difference that is in terms of being able to get on any of the 3 doors and tap your hot pass as you get on. The bike racks are inside. That's the first for a bus for us. On the back door, there are some easy to install bike racks. and lots of places for people with mobility devices. So even if there are two people in a wheelchair or some other mobility device, we can handle that. The stations are different too. This is just, I didn't grab all of them, but this is one where it's shared bike and pedestrian so that the bike lanes can still get through even when buses are stopped, and make sure that everybody can move there. And well, I already talked about the bikes, but it's rear boarding and very easy racks, which is great. It's a first for us. They do it down in Eugene, and they've been doing that for a number of years. So we stole their idea. The other project that is underway now that I'm sporting my cool hat on is the Better Red project, which is improving the red line, extending it on the west side, 10 additional stations. And on the east side, when it's going to the airport from Gateway, right now it runs on a single track, which means that both directions have to be on the same track, which means that we have to make sure we schedule in a way so that they don't ever meet, which means that the schedule gets really complicated and we have to run the whole schedule based on the red line, which makes no sense. So this is going to fix that problem. And there will be in 2024 a new station. Sorry, this is a little bit hard to see, but a new station at Gateway on the north side of where the current stations are for the train in one direction, so that we no longer have to do that weird looping thing that we go like 5 miles an hour in both directions, and can actually have more reliability on the entire system because of this project. Southwest Corridor, I said I would talk about. I'm just going to touch on it. It was put on the ballot in 2020 with a whole mess of other measures. The business community decided they were not in favor of the source of taxes, and there was a lot of communication against it. It failed. I don't know, the for vote was like 46, 47%, something like that. I don't remember exactly. There is some talk about potentially bringing it back in the next 5 or 6 years. We'll see how that goes. But it had a number of stations along the way, and we were pretty proud of the fact that it included affordable housing at a number of key stations, and there was a huge amount of public engagement around it. So, you know, we'll see, maybe not. Frankly, many of the light rail lines that we ended up building were voted down or said no to originally, and then we came back and figured out a way to make it happen. The other thing I wanted to talk about was carbon and emissions. The slide that I'm missing in here is the one that says, because of that development that I was talking about, because of not just the fact that somebody's leaving their car at home and getting on a bus, but because of the walkability, the bikeability, the communities that get built, the benefit that we bring in reducing other people's carbon emission through transportation was recently calculated by a national study to be 6 times what we burn, even if we're running regular petroleum diesel. So we save way more carbon emissions than we emit, even before we started doing any of this stuff. But I was involved in this, which is why I have slides on it. So just real quickly, a few years ago, we did a baseline inventory because we didn't really know how much we were emitting. There was a lot of interest in reducing emissions, but we didn't know, and so you don't have a benefit cost. We did that emission and said, whoa, that fleet number is really big. Whoa, that electricity number is really big. And over the course of the last year and a half, I'm proud to say that I brought together teams to have a decision-making process that got us to not buying our first electric bus. We were on that path already, but switching to 100% renewable electricity and switching to renewable diesel so that we dropped our emissions close to 70% in the past 2 years. There's still some to go. This red here is the emissions that go into making the renewable diesel, and shipping it. So it's not perfect, but it's way better than it used to be. So we're close to a 70% reduction, plus the fact that we're already reducing everybody else's emissions by far more. We set some targets and have unfortunately done the really easy parts already. We have to kind of enter our way as the technology comes. We have a plan to get to 100% zero emission bus fleet by 2040. Which means that we don't have any plans right now to buy any more diesel buses. And then to get to net zero by 2050. Real quickly, the other thing that I'd love for you to take a look at is at trimet.org/forward. We are coming to the end of a service planning project, looking at where we should put service. Two things. One, we got some extra funding, so we're going to be able to put out some extra funding. But two, with the pandemic and the reduction in workforce availability and lots of retirements from our operators, we had to cut service because we literally could not provide it. We did not have enough operators. We are now starting to get people back. We're having great hiring and training classes. And so we're doing the planning for, okay, where does it go? And we're talking about something like a 30% increase in bus service compared to today. We looked at equity, and this is just a representative map of looking at equity issues and communities of concern. Our equity index combines a number of different things to look at people who are less represented, have fewer options, lower income, for various reasons, really rely on transit more than anything else. We also looked at activity density, so that whole thing about development areas and that supporting transit. You can imagine a cul-de-sac neighborhood with houses on 1 acre lots at the top of a hill is not a good place for transit. Hardly anybody can walk to a bus stop. Nobody rides it. They all have cars. But places where there's lots of activity, and this is showing a color combo mix of residents per square mile and jobs per square mile, because it's the mix of the two that are most conducive to transit and the most likely to have people who are trying to get to and from. And there's a concept map that you can look at trimet.org/forward and give us comments. And the comments are still open for another week at least. So we'd love to hear from you. Anything good or bad. There's lots of places where we're increasing the frequency. There are some places where we're adding new lines. And there are a few places where the low ridership and the low equity need is telling us you should probably get rid of that line because it's just not, we should use those resources somewhere else that's more needed. That is the very quick overview of TriMet. And I'm happy to answer more questions, and feel free to follow up with me on my email.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for speaking. I'm one of the students that drives from Hillsborough every night to this class. So that's one of the transit routes that we talked about. So when this class came out, I TriMet mapped it. And it gave me, I think it said an hour 47 from like 185th in Hillsborough out to this class through TriMet, walking. So to someone, a student like me, what are your recommendations because I want to get more involved in public transit, but that is just not conducive to my schedule. The 17-minute drive is not conducive.
Right.
And then a follow-up question is, one of my main concerns with public transit is the safety aspect. And I know that TriMet has been struggling with both safety for riders, but also safety for drivers. A little bit of my background is in law and safety. So what safety measures are you guys taking, and what safety goals do you have in the future?
Great. Yeah, two great questions. So safety first. So what we are doing is we had a whole process called reimagining safety and security. We are very aware of not wanting to sort of criminalize activity on the bus that we can just get off the bus and calm things down instead of arresting people and hauling them off or whatever. And not wanting to do that with not paying fares and other things as well. And engage the community with, okay, what should we be doing? And what we ended up with was a system that still has transit officers, transit police officers, but is very clear. We have a safety response team that is really more about just presence on the system and de-escalating issues and getting them off board and away from transit centers and other riders so that they can provide other resources, whether that's counseling or whatever is needed. So they have a whole range of resources available. We have customer safety officers who are there as well. But what we're doing right now is staffing up to be able to fill those roles so that we can get them on board, get them at the stations, get them in those places so that our riders see them, feel better just by seeing them, which does help. But more importantly, anybody who is thinking about acting up or causing trouble now sees a uniformed, person with a reflective vest, whatever, and it literally, that presence helps calm things down. The de-escalation helps calm things down. And then we can always rely back on the transit police if we have to be able to do that. So we're trying to find a way to make the whole system safer, not just our operators. You probably have seen over the last couple of years, our buses now have these plexiglass barriers for the operators so that they feel more safe. But we want our riders to feel safe as well. In terms of the service, one of the painful parts is that long distance transit service is really hard to do extremely well without either a huge amount of money or a huge amount of money, really, because that's the way to really deal with it. Either you build like express tracks on max so that it can go faster rather than stopping each one, or you run a whole bunch of express buses. And the only way that typically works is if you're only running it during the peak hours, which wouldn't do you any good for this kind of class anyway. So the sort of hard bitten part of me says, we may not have the perfect answer for you. What we do have, though, is with this, all these yellow lines, if you can see them, all these yellow lines are improving service to frequent service. And one of the things that's part of your travel time is waiting time. The more frequent the bus comes, the more frequent the train comes, the less waiting time you have. And waiting time is the most painful, right? So I don't have that much waiting time for my bus ride home because I happen to live on the line 12. We don't have a bus that goes all the way to Hillsborough because it wouldn't be very reliable. We do have the MAX, but it doesn't stop right here. I think actually one of the proposals is to put frequent service between this area up to Goose Hollow so that you could skip instead of having to go into the middle of downtown. So that would save you some time. You'll have to look and see what you think of it. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, sorry. Would park and ride solve some of that? So you kind of made it a hybrid where you go to a park and ride and then you can come.
Yeah, so, and that is part of our system. We have over 10,000 park and ride spaces. None of them after the pandemic are full. It used to be pre-pandemic that the closest ones, like there's one at Sunset, there's one at Gateway, there's one at Barber. The closest ones to downtown, the closest big ones would fill up and people would have to go to the next ones. Now that's not true anymore.
Yeah, I was wondering about that because when I look them up, they say it usually fills by 7 a.m.
Does it still say that?
Yeah, it says that.
Oh,
on there.
okay.
So I thought,
That-
well, there's no
Not
way.
true at all, and I've got to remember to tell somebody to change that. It used to be true. With the change in telework, which we expect to die down a little bit, but we don't expect to ever go away. We just don't have the same peak of the peak ridership, and it's peak ridership to downtown and the Lloyd District where parking is expensive that really drew parking rides. If the traffic isn't that bad, if you're already in your car, it's very tempting to just keep going. Others, yeah.
Could you touch on specifically the decision to route the FX over the Union Pacific tracks at 8th Avenue? 'Cause
Yeah.
The first time I heard it, I had like a 40-minute detour.
Yeah, so the attraction of doing that is not so that we can go over freight track, obviously. The attraction of doing that is to be able to get to the Tillicum Crossing and have the connection to South Waterfront. And ultimately to OHSU and the VA up on the hill. To be honest, a little bit of the reason we did it is that at the time we were doing the design, we were working with UP under the expectation that we were helping them develop a signaling system at their track yard that would actually reduce the number of delays at 8th Avenue. I think that actually came together. What has happened, unfortunately, in the freight rail community is that trains have gotten even longer. And so we occasionally run into that. We ultimately decided, it was a hard decision, but ultimately decided to stick with that alignment and have a planned reroute if we needed to. So in most cases, unless you get stuck like right at the crossing, if that thing is down and we expect it to be a while, they're going to take the Hawthorne and then come back and do what they can with the next trip. So it is not a perfect solution, but it was sort of a tough decision that we ended up going with this alignment. If that ends up happening all the time, it's something we might come back and revisit.
It feels like BRT or BRT as bus services are kind of replacing light rail. I mean, instead of doing the it was and it seems like, I don't know if that's what's going on in other places. Is there, what are the pros and cons of?
The simple version is that the great thing about BRT is that it's very flexible. The terrible thing about BRT is that it's very flexible. And the reason I say that is when you're building a light rail, you can't just, leave out a mile of track and have it run. But in BRT, you can leave out a mile of bus lane. I've got to reel it back. When BRT got really popular was during the Bush administration, when they were literally trying to divert money from rail to bus, and then presumably eventually cancel all of it. But what came out of that was an option, which doesn't replace light rail, but it's an in-between, right? So light rail is high cost, high value. It costs less per passenger for us to run light rail, but it costs a lot more to build it. Frequent bus is great, but it has some reliability issues and capacity issues, and it's standard bus stops. So BRT is trying to find that happy middle space. One of the other things that light rail does is it attracts more development. BRT attracts some more development than frequent service, which attracts a lot more development than just standard service, which basically attracts no development. And so BRT is trying to find that happy medium and use it in the right place. And our approach is find the right tool for the job, understand the corridor, and use that correct tool to use it, not sweeping, take one and replace it with the other. There are some places that tried to do that. Cleveland was very big on, they had some old rail lines that had been built years ago and were in really poor shape. And they built a new BRT line, which is a nice line. But they were kind of crowing that it was the next big thing. And I think they ended up backing off on that because they now are considering doing both. Yeah.
Just a little bit, in the business plan, there's a lot of references to the impact of the pandemic.
Mhm.
I'm just curious if you wanted to just talk about.
Yeah, I left out the ridership slide. So ridership is the biggest thing that we saw, obviously. The first month or two of the pandemic, our ridership went down to about a third of what it used to be. So we used to be at 1.8, 1.9 million boardings per week. And it dropped down, actually, I don't remember what the number was. It dropped down to like 600,000 or 700,000 boardings per week. We never got below that. There are some systems that went down to like 10%. There are some commuter rail systems that went down to 5%. We are now back, last I saw, up to about 62% of where we were. So we're now at about 1.2 million rides per week. Like I said, we don't expect to naturally come back up to 1.9 million because we think some of those riders are gone for good. At least they're gone in terms of trying to get into work 4 or 5 days a week because they're working from home some of the time. But our aim is obviously to get back up to that ridership level by re-attracting some and then attracting new and building on that with things like the Forward Together. That also took a big chunk out of our funding. And so that's been an issue. There was a big software program that I was working on to make our maintenance better. And we were going to have to sell bonds to pay for the whole project. And the lack of the fare revenue meant that we had to put that on hold. So there are things we wanted to do. We had already committed to the Better Red. We had already committed to the FX. There were some other things that we wanted to do that we had to wait on. Well, hopefully we'll get back to that relatively soon. Yeah.
Big fan of TriMet, right it all the time, day and night.
Sure.
And what I'm wondering about is sort of the messaging and marketing, because I often am the only person well too often. And I end up on a pretty line. I kept it wherever I want. So it feels like quite a luxury. And I'm wondering, do you do your own message marketing in TriMet or are all the agencies combined?
We do, well, we do a large portion of our own. We direct a large portion of our own. We have private ad company that helps with the messaging and doing the ads. Part of that is we haven't been super vocal about things, especially when we were still kind of in lockdown. We weren't promoting at all, right? And so we're still getting back to, okay, where are we to the point where we have enough operators to have reliable enough service to really push it? Where are we, do we have enough frequency to be able to really push it? What other kinds of messages? So we're still feeling our way back into that, which is probably why you don't see as much. We also do a lot more targeted ads now, So we hope to be able to counter that over time. But thank you.
Do you want to take a few more questions?
Sure, yeah, you tell me when I'm supposed to stop. I forgot the
Yeah,
time.
let's take just 2 more questions.
Okay.
I know that, yeah, let's take 2 more questions.
Okay, so I think you have your hand up right there.
Yeah, thank you. So last year in this class, there was a student who was, they were working on a program to introduce light rail and transit to younger students and hot pass and all that. And just today I was taking the train up to the park, so a bunch of elementary students getting off the train, the yellow line. So I'm wondering, like, how does TriMet engage younger people so that they incorporate transit in those personal habits instead of driving to turn 16?
Right. Right.
See how terrible it is.
I am not a true expert on this, but we do have several people who are engagement, who are out there talking with community, including going and doing presentations at schools to talk about TriMet, try to even encourage rides. We have done more of that when we have big projects going on, especially like when the orange line opened, when the yellow line opened years ago. It's just easier to have the resources to be able to do that, but we continue to try to do outreach there. And we have some teaching materials for teachers as well for several different age groups to try and introduce the concepts. So there's some of that, but I'm not the best expert on that. Yeah.
When you, to go back to the Southwest border tax line, you learned about why it was shot down and what is TriMet doing to either get it passed or to adjust the proposal?
I know less about this than I would like to really be able to answer that question. Part of it was what I mentioned, which was the tax source. In most places in the country, if you had something like this, it would be a sales tax vote, and that would be basically asking the voters who are the consumers whether they want to pay a little bit more. In Oregon, we don't have a sales tax. We have a payroll tax, which the employers feel like they pay, and we have property tax, which is hard to spend on this kind of thing. So there's not a whole lot else. So the source of the tax was a serious problem. So there were people who were against the ballot and had a lot of negative messaging out there. There was what little I know was, there was concern about the price. I think from what I understand, a little bit of confusion. It was a big package, a little bit of a confusion about what was really in there and what benefits were being brought on. But in the long run, I think we're going to know more later if the region decides that it really wants to go back to a vote. We'll dig into that more to understand what it really was and see if we can reflect the community's needs better in this.
Timing is really hard though. It's right in the middle of the pandemic too.
Yeah, do not introduce a new high-cost capital project when everybody is worried about the Great Depression hitting again because of the global pandemic. So maybe that's all we learned. I don't know.
We can Ellen a round of applause. Ellen, let's break for 10 minutes. Let's break for 10. We'll come back at 7:45. Dan will be up to talk about Streetcar.
gonna stand on to make sure I'm not getting in trouble with anybody. Safe group.
I'm still watching.
I know, sometimes I say things I shouldn't.
You will be online.
It is recorded,
It is
yeah.
online.
No, yeah. Well, I appreciate you having me. I'm not as old as Alan. So you took the class in '95. So in 2002, my first job at Peabody was judge's job. So I ran this class for 3 years. It's the closest I've ever been to being fired. Because maybe after tonight, we'll see. But the projectors back then never worked, right? So I remember the Peabody director had a presentation and I could not get the PowerPoint projector to work. He was so pissed.
Who was the director then?
It was Brandon Williams.
Oh, well, Brian.
No, he was a great guy, but you got it easy, Judge. Yeah. So my name's Dan. I'm the director of Portland Streetcar Inc. I run a private nonprofit. It's a 501c3, and I work with the city and TriMet to implement the entirety of the streetcar project. And so we were just talking. I get to take credit for Alan's first 20 slides or so because all of that really applies to the streetcar story. The land use, the TOD, environmental benefits, the reason we're running transit in the first place. That's all relevant to the streetcar story. But one of the things that we were just talking about is probably one of your big questions is why doesn't TriMet just run the streetcar? So I'll try and get to some of the answers to that and show you what we're up to and why we exist. And then I think afterwards we're going to do a couple streetcar questions and then you're coming back up for a panel, a small panel. Did you know?
I mean, I'm here.
Unless you leave, okay? So people generally familiar with the streetcar? Is it people who've ridden the streetcar? Okay. This is our system today. Oops, I'm sorry, I'm in the way. This is our system today. We basically have 3 lines: the north-south line from 23rd Avenue down to South Waterfront, Lowell and Bond. And then we have the A and B loops, which are one of the only circular transit systems in the world. I highly recommend not building a circular transit system unless you've got a place to pull over. And this is one of the major issues with our system today is we just keep running in a circle. And if something happens, we're just stuck. And so we get behind schedule and we can't catch up. And so that's one of the lessons learned. That wasn't my main talking point for this slide, but just keep in mind, like, generally speaking, if you like read the London Tube or whatever, they'll have like sidings and you can pull a train out of service and be able to catch up. So the A loop runs in a clockwise direction. The B loop runs in a counterclockwise direction over the Broadway and Silicon crossings. We have 17 streetcars right now. One of them does not run. That was the first one built in the United States. It was a prototype. It has a Rockwell propulsion system on it that has never worked. So we really have 16 streetcars and our full service is 14 cars in service. So that leaves us with very, very, very few spare cars to run our service. So we have been pulling back on service a little bit until we get some new cars online this year to be able to deploy that. We have 70 stations, around 130 employees. 80 of those employees are TriMet employees. And I'll get into some details about that. About 40 of those are City of Portland employees. And then my organization has around 10 employees. And that whole group kind of works together to implement the project. Anywhere, so for the TriMet, it's the rail operators and the mechanics. They come through the TriMet system, they're hired as bus drivers, they get trained on rail. And then the next thing up, they can move to streetcar. And so we have operators switching back and forth between streetcar and MAX. And then we're just part of a regional transit system. One of the most important things is most of TriMet's lines cross the streetcar. So we're a central city circulator. We're moving around the city and trying to get people to go wherever they're going. But a lot of this is just connectivity around a really, really dense urban center. And so this slide is meant to kind of help you understand the difference between the light rail and the streetcar project. And the biggest difference is our ability to move into tight spaces. Well, our cars are 8 feet wide. The MAX trains are 8 feet, 8 inches wide. Our cars are 60 feet long. MAX are typically twice that length. So we're a little bit smaller, a little bit more nimble, and we tend to fall more in the category of, I think Alan called it transit-oriented development. We're more development-oriented transit. So we're fitting into the fabric of the city. It doesn't take us a full city block to turn left. We can just kind of run with traffic. A little bit more nimble than a light rail vehicle, but operating at a slower speed. So our max speed right now is probably 40 miles an hour, although we rarely go that fast. Streetcars are slow, but they don't have to be slow. In some ways, we've designed the system to be a little bit more pedestrian paced. It's just meant to be a walk extender, not unlike what Alan was saying in terms of people walking around using their whatever tools they need to get about the city, but they use the streetcar to extend the breadth of their city. Generally, our stations are pretty close together.
maybe less than half mile. Light rail tends to be much broader. So our development story tends to be along the alignment everywhere rather than just at stations along the way. Okay, so the next 2 slides are get into a little bit of the structure thing right here. So the key to the streetcar system is the city of Portland is the owner and the operator of Portland Streetcar. They have TriMet, they have a contract with TriMet for operators and mechanics. They have a contract with my organization to provide essentially management. So we do the budget, long range planning, communications, customer service, and any project management. That all runs through my organization. And so I have a board of directors, but ultimately the board of directors for Portland Streetcar is Portland City Council, because they are the owner and the operator of the system. There's a document out there called the master agreement that governs all of this between the city and TriMet. And it was meant to be this like long range, how are we going to partner on this project so we stop arguing about it every year about who's doing what. And I can tell you right now, every year we have to go back and revisit that thing. So it was a lofty goal. Alan, you participated in that. But it's one of those things that we've learned is the ongoing education of the bureaucracies is critical to like keeping this moving forward. Because every year people were like, wait, why doesn't TriMet run it? Why is the city run it? And this gets into this relationship here. And so to appreciate that the city is more in this for the development side, the housing, climate, affordable housing and equity piece. Cities don't generally run transit because it's a thing that they can't pay enough attention to, and they also have to run the water bureau and the parks and everything else. There's a lot that comes along with running transit. So the city is interested in city shaping. TriMet is interested in moving people, generally speaking. I'm just going to use broad terms. TriMet's job is to move people. The city's job is to build the city. However, in instances like this, where the city has ambitious plans, this is the Pearl District before the Lovejoy Viaduct came down. In this instance, the city wanted to build out this whole new neighborhood. There's no roads there. You can't run a bus if you wanted to. It's not really appropriate for light rail. Yet we needed something to unlock the land. So we started running the streetcar through gravel here before any buildings were there. And TriMet was not interested in running this system. It did not fit into their mission. It made no sense. And there's a guy named Dick Feeney who, if you go to TC O'Leary's bar on Alberta 28th, any night, he's there. He called the streetcar the donkey trolley, and he was a TriMet finance guy, and that term has stuck with us ever since then, right? So TriMet's approach to the streetcar was, they weren't super interested in running it, didn't quite understand it. But now that we start to build out areas like the Pearl and South Waterfront and all the other development areas I'll show you in a second, it's starting to make more sense. So what the relationship does is let me say the other important thing here is the city's fully responsible for all capital costs. So any construction costs, cars, rail, that's a city thing. But what we have through this master agreement is a relationship where when it looks more and more like a place where TriMet should be running a bus service, they start paying more and more of the operating cost. And so essentially TriMet is buying operations from the streetcar. So this is the most dense census tract in the state. There's almost like no bus service here whatsoever. TriMet pays streetcar to run service in this area. And the metrics we use are square feet of development, the number of housing units, ridership, and then the payroll taxes collected by TriMet in that district determine how much they're paying. So over time, they're paying up to 85% of the operating costs of the streetcar. The city's paying less and less of the operating cost. And in theory, that frees up money on the city side to deal with capital and asset management. Is there questions about that? It might be in the room. I don't know.
I not to chew my own too much, but yeah, that was me and a guy named Art Pierce at Devon. Sat down and worked through this with Dick Feeney.
Yeah.
Who eventually, came to believe that streetcar made sense and came up with this scenario. In fact, I think that's my graph.
This is your slide. Yeah. 100%. Yeah, I have updated it. I actually went back on the older version just for you. So the relationship has really evolved over time, and TriMet's a great partner. Right now, they fund about 72% of all the operating costs of streetcar. But it is the kind of thing where about twice a year, they're like, wait, what are we doing? Why are we doing that when we do this? And so there's a lot of education that needs to occur there. But the real nut of the situation is the city wants control of the city shaping, placemaking elements of it so they can deliver on the climate and the affordable housing and jobs growth that they want to see. And they're out there in front, they're taking the risk. And then as it looks more and more like a community that TriMet should be in, TriMet steps in as a partner and essentially pays to operate the streetcar. Diabolical, I like that. That's good. So we have the system in place today. We have just a massive numbers of economic development around the system, and I'll show you some numbers about who's benefiting from that. But already, just with what's in place today, we've got multiple development sites that we're running through directly right now. OMSI, South Waterfront, River Place, the post office here, Albina Vision down in Lower Albina. These are all areas where streetcars are running already today. We're working with these developments now to get more and more service in place. I will say, somebody asked about the rail crossing down over here on the FX. One thing that's happening is the viaduct that carries the streetcar over the tracks at OMSI is sinking into the river because we built it on sawdust. That's a different presentation.
Oh, wow.
But there could be an opportunity, and there may be an opportunity to tie in a viaduct that would deal with the FX and the streetcar at the same time. And so that's a big idea that people are starting to think about, but it's a little challenging to imagine if it would actually work. But that's a thing we've been talking with TriMet Capital on. So these bars represent the amount of growth potential. This is how much the zoning potential left in the central city right now. We could absorb all of the region's growth for 2040 just within the streetcar alignment. And the reason that's important for me is that's where our ridership comes from, right? So this chart here, blue is housing units, green is our average weekday ridership over 20 years. Every time a housing unit is built on the streetcar line, we get a new streetcar rider. That I need to update. This actually goes to 2015, but this relationship continues today. So what we're getting is, people aren't using park and ride for streetcar. They're just walking out their front door and they're going to the places that they need to go. Most of those are jobs, students, and errands. Most of our riders are daily riders. There's a notion that streetcar is like a tourism thing, but that's not. People don't just ride the streetcar for fun. It's not that fun. We do have an element of tourism, but for some people, it's a good time. But the important thing is some of these numbers about who's riding our system. So 30% of our riders are non-white. That's actually higher than the regional average. 40% are earning less than $33,000 a year. So there's a lot of people using the system. They're living in the affordable housing that's built along the system. 40% of all the subsidized affordable housing in Portland is on the streetcar line. That's intentional. That's by design. Those are our customers. 1/3 of all the jobs in the city of Portland are on the streetcar line. And like I said, nearly 1/3 are full or part-time university students. So obviously, not unlike TriMet, Portland State University is a huge driver for students for us. The connection between PSU and OHSU, if anybody's been a student here, we were carrying absolutely crushed loads before the pandemic. We have to add extra service because of all the students trying to get down South Waterfront to PSU. That demand was so high, it was incredible. We pride ourselves on being an extremely accessible system. We deploy our wheelchair ramps. This rate is 7 times the regional bus system per hour. We're deploying our ramp to allow people with wheelchairs on at a rate 7 times higher than the bus system. So we have a lot of people living downtown trying to get around and using streetcar as a mobility tool because it's so easy to just get on and off and access what we're doing. Okay, a little bit about our fleet. Anybody who's ridden it recently know that these cars are Skoda from Czech Republic. They are 22 years old. They look like shit, and they need to be replaced. So we have 7 of those. We've got 3 Inicon cars, which are also from the Czech Republic. We have 7 cars that were made in Clackamas. They were the first modern streetcars built in the United States. This was the prototype I talked about earlier. It doesn't run. So we took the Made in USA sticker off. But that's our fleet today. We are receiving 3 new cars here from a company called Brookville. It's in Brookville, Pennsylvania. It's like 2 hours northeast of Pittsburgh, kind of near like Puxatawny, Phil territory. Those are our cars in production last week. Those are scheduled to be delivered sometime in the next quarter. So that'll bring our total size up to about 19. That will be really nice. We'll be able to add service back on the east side. Right now, we're running every 20 minutes, which is terrible. We should be able to get that down to 15 or maybe 12 minutes with those new cars. Let me skip around a little bit here. So we're working on a project now to replace these 10 cars and this car right here. So we're going to be ordering 11 new streetcars That's going to be the largest procurement of what we call a modern streetcar in 25 years. It's a real, appreciate what a challenge it is to buy like 3 of these cars. It's a total pain. Like Sound Transit in Seattle right now is buying 280 light rail cars. That's easier to get car builders' attention if you're doing that. And all of these cities I was pointing to here, these are all cities growing streetcar, have streetcar today. They all did it just a little bit different. So some people have wide cars, some have narrow cars, some have longer cars. You know, we can deal with different paint colors, but if you're a car manufacturer and you're trying to build a product at scale, having all these communities do something different is a total pain. So I'm the chair of an organization called the Community Streetcar Coalition. It's a national coalition of all the streetcar cities. And we're working within the context of that to try and get people to knock that off, for one. But as we're making this major procurement, getting other cities to join on. So the cars we're buying here is actually a procurement that Tacoma did. They bought a bunch of streetcars and we said, well, if you're already building, just give us 3. That's what we could afford at the time. But we're working now to replace our big fleet. So we're talking to Tacoma, Seattle, Washington, DC, and Tucson, who are all cities that run the 8-foot wide car rather than a wider car, to see if we can't get an order up to maybe 20, 25 cars, which would really bring the price down, improve the schedule, and improve responsiveness. These are some pictures of some potential cars that we're looking at now. This is actually the updated model of what we run all day, the Skoda. It's from Czech Republic. I'm sorry, I'm a really bad photographer. This one's built in Zagreb, Croatia. And this is a Siemens car. So this is actually the same car that they use for Max Light Rail, but it's super narrow. So there are options out there for us. And so we're really excited to get this RFP on the streets. We're hoping to get this out the door probably like June of next year so we can begin buying new cars and have them in service somewhere in the 25, 26 window. And there's a lot of exciting technology out here. You'll see some of these are completely off wire. They're fully battery. We're going to be replacing our fleet with a partial hybrid car. So we can probably go 2 to 3 miles without having the pantograph touching the overhead canter system. And I'll show you a little bit with our expansion plans. That makes a huge difference in terms of what we can do. But also like level boarding, so we can get rid of the bridge plate. So there's a couple new things that we're excited to get in this new car. A couple of our programs. One thing we do, we pay artists of color to display art on the streetcars. Here's a couple of examples. This was one from this guy Vincent. He did this one from Hawaii, and we had people calling us all the time trying to figure out where the car is so they could go and take pictures of it. This artist, it was amazing art. Unfortunately, he died like last week suddenly. It's kind of a weird. I don't have the details on it, but he was an amazing guy to work with. Younger guy. Great social media presence here, and people really appreciate this. We launched this kind of in the heart of the pandemic, where ridership, not unlike TriMet, ours dropped similarly. We were trying to figure out ways to get the streetcar to be part of the community, be part of this recovery with the Black Lives Matter and everything else going on. So we just started paying artists to do installations. And so we've done about 6 of these so far. They've been really great. We launched a new rider ambassador program, which is similar to what Alan described with the safety response team, SRT with TriMet. These are PSI employees. We have them outfitted now with like non-threatening. We're trying to make them look very non-policey, non-fair enforcement. So they have a purple vest, which is one of our branding colors. They carry these backpacks that have water, granola bars, feminine products, Narcan if somebody's overdosing, blankets, any number of supplies that might be used to kind of help people wherever they're at on the system. It's not meant as a kind of homeless outreach program, but that we are trying to target whoever needs help on the streetcar. And generally speaking, those are the people that need help. So if we can offer them a pair of socks, help them find access to resources, that's a benefit to the whole system and it's a benefit to them. We just won the Alice Award from the Street Trust 2 weeks ago for this program. We're super proud about it. And I'll say, like, the people we've hired are just insanely mission driven. I don't know who these people are. This guy, Zayad, works for us half-time, and he goes and does crisis, like de-escalation crisis hotline right after this for a different job. And so, but they make the program. We've been able to find people who can just do this work and are very passionate about it. What was I about to say about that? They're so passionate about it. We have to kind of talk about mission creep, I guess. So their desire to help people, it's like a economist curve where the benefit to the streetcar is the highest on the streetcar. But if they can get them off the streetcar and they have wheeled them sometimes miles to a shelter so they can get safe. All of a sudden, like the benefit to my system is diminishing, but the benefit to society is growing. And we're having to kind of manage that from like what's our role in this whole thing? And it's been an interesting conversation because we talked to a lot of our partners, including the people who run TriMet, the SRT program, about how we fit this program into the whole regional response with mental crisis and homelessness. And so it's part of a larger suite of things, I would say. We're trying to make it so it's not just, let's just get them off the train. It's get them off the train and get them somewhere, but that's not always possible. They're not responsive. They're like, nobody's calling, dispatching these people. They're just out on the system, just identifying issues as they see them. Okay, last little bit is just about expansion. This is a plan that was developed in 2009 under then Mayor Sam Adams. And it identified all the potential streetcar routes in the city. We just focus in the city right now. But there was all kinds of ideas. In fact, this one's blue because it was presumed to have been built, but it never got built. This would be using the Lake Oswego rail right away. But there was ideas to build streetcar in Sandy, to Montgomery Park, all kinds of ideas. Obviously, none of those have come to fruition for a variety of reasons. But what it's actually led to is some other investments. Sorry, I'm choking on that water. We've kind of stepped away from MLK because there's an idea to make that a more enhanced transit, like a bus program. That's probably a better fit for that community. Some of the other things like, Division or Powell and Alberta and Belmont, there's already plans in place to make those bus systems work better. We're open to the conversation, but there's not a strong demand to move streetcar out there at this time. The one place where we have a lot of action right now is in the Montgomery Park area. So Forest Park, people can picture the Montgomery Park building in deep northwest. Adjacent to that is a 20-acre parcel that used to be the ESCO steel plant. It's now completely vacant. It's 20 acres of industrially zoned land. We're working right now with the city, the Bureau of Planning, and Prosper Portland, PBOT, and myself to change the zoning on that land to allow for just either high intensity employment or affordable housing or a mix of that. So the idea right now, the streetcar today goes up north, goes to 23rd and comes back down. In the future, it would go two-way go up 23rd, new streets on Roosevelt and Wilson to a terminus at Montgomery Park. They're actually completely rebuilding this building to be able to get off the streetcar, walk through the middle of it to a new bridge that takes you over to Forest Park. So you have good streetcar access to Forest Park. And then we're going to come back down 23rd. So we're going to run two-way. And the key to this whole thing is we're going to be off wire. So this whole segment will be battery. There'll be no catenary system, no overhead wires. And because our cars are narrow enough, they're 8 feet wide. Total, we need about 8 feet, 3 inches total. We can run two-way in traffic without impacting any parking. So it's going to be a tight one for us because we're really relying on people knowing how to park their car. But the other big play here is this brings transit dollars into total reconstruction of 23rd Avenue, which if you've driven on this recently, it's a total mess. It's a challenge for the city to identify money to rebuild 23rd Avenue when you've got issues in East Portland and elsewhere. So what we're trying to do is bring private sector money in, federal transit dollars in to a project that will, one, rebuild 23rd, two, provide new clean transit to this district, and three, support a construction of a ton of either housing or jobs or both. Think about that. Okay, so this is the picture of the Montgomery Park building here. And if you could picture it today, you probably go there to the Adidas employee store. I guess the only reason people go there. Right now, Montgomery Park is the second largest office building in Oregon, has 3,200 employees. It's surrounded entirely by parking. And so they have a vision right there to add probably four housing projects, and then the American Can building, which if you go out there today, it's kind of a funny looking building, but actually just uses parking. Just a total refurbishment of that building into some type of either public market or build to suite, some type of campus development. Another 1 million square feet of development there. So this property is undergoing this transition now. This has already happened. And what we're trying to do is tie in with this large parcel here right next to it to have some little bit better fabric. So we don't have like an industrial use right next to this massive investment in Montgomery Park. And you have a new streetcar line running right through the campus there. I like this project a lot because to me, it's the best things about streetcar. I don't love the fact that we run on MLK and Grand on the east side where it's 4 lanes of traffic going 50 miles an hour. The pedestrian environment is challenging. If you're waiting for a streetcar, it's not quite the same as waiting, outside Lovejoy Baking in the Pearl District. It's got a different feel. So this will be a very well traffic calmed kind of place-making move for us. Probably functionally looking a little bit more like the OHSU tram area in terms of like how we're running through a plaza or something like that. So there's a lot going on with this project. There's the transit project, which is one thing. There's the land use play, which is another. And the important thing with the land use play is we're changing the zoning of the land from industrial to what we call mixed use. That increases the value of the land for the people who own it. So what we're trying to work with them now is on some type of benefits agreement where we're requiring them to either build the roads, build the streetcar, but also build affordable housing, or enter into some type of community benefits agreement that makes sure that the value that's created from the land use change is captured and deployed to all those people in the city that we want to make sure see the benefit of it. So we're not just changing the zoning and walking away. And then obviously there's supporting infrastructure with roads and parks and things like that. So there's a lot of moving pieces here. This is what I spend most of my life on, is trying to keep these things from falling down. So we are looking to get probably what we call a locally preferred alternative through city council early next spring. So that would say, okay, we're actually going to try and do this project and start construction 2 or 3 years out from now. I think my last slide is just about partnership. The streetcar is all about partnership. We've got partnerships with the universities, with the hospitals, big time partnership with TriMet, obviously, all the city bureaus, Metro. We'll work with anybody, right? We're not able to be successful just being by ourselves. So this picture here is at our 20th anniversary, which was last year. This Sam Desu, the TriMet general manager, obviously Congressman Blumenauer was there. We work with anybody we can find because we're such a small organization. We need other people to kind of help carry our water when we can. So that's a lot of my job is kind of keeping those relationships going and educating people, and making sure the streetcar stays relevant in the community that we're trying to build moving forward. And I think that's it. And I do.
That's fine. To take a few questions.
I'm just wondering why, like, the benefits of running a streetcar with a battery up 23rd as opposed to just having the catenary wire as well.
Yeah. Okay. So one, the canyon wire has to go somewhere. So the poles, to picture 23rd, they're very narrow sidewalks. They're like as narrow as this, right? So if I stick a pole in that, you can't use that sidewalk anymore. So those catenary poles that are holding up the wire are a major thing. Second is that requires a traction, we call it traction power cabinet, like a big power signal cabinet that has to go somewhere in the right of way. So those are 2 like right of way constraints. The third is urban forestry in this area here. They're very concerned that we build all this and there's no place for trees. So if we don't have catenary, we can plant way more trees. Now, the biggest thing for me is it saves $19 million on a project that's $60 million, right? So that's pretty good. And they're quieter and they're just cooler. I think it's going to position the streetcar in a way that'll be different than it is today. I think people get a different image of what it could be. But the big move for me was financial, because the cars cost the same to build. Does that answer?
Yeah. I do have another question.
We'll circle back. I didn't see who was there. Yeah.
So you kind of mentioned how the equity factor and the fact that like people are using it for a reason, like they use it on a daily basis. It seems, I feel like there's a misconception that it's like a novelty thing.
100%. I mean, do you feel that way?
I mean, yeah, a little bit. And
Yeah.
I think it's in a way that's not a bad thing to have it sort of, not that there's a misconception that we think it's all about it, but I think that having that novelty aspect, it kind of makes the city feel more like a city and like a kind of European, like walkable area.
Mhm.
But I think it's really important to point out that it actually is a functional thing.
Yeah.
Not just a
We
choice.
are so as an organization, we're the 3rd largest transit system in the state. Our ridership, I think I skipped over the ridership. Before pandemic, we were about 15,000, which is like the same as the yellow line max. We're at about 8,000 now. It still puts us, we have more people on the streetcar than any bus line. And people don't always appreciate what that means, right? It's a constant communication battle for me to remind people of the value of streetcar. And to Alan's earlier slides, the value to the streetcar kind of, it may diminish in your head the further away you get from it. And so if you're in Hillsborough, you don't give a shit about the streetcar because it's not there. And so we poll terribly at a regional level because unless you use it every day, you don't care about it. And so the best polling I've ever seen in a regional level, we hit like 40% approval rate, which I think is great because we cover like 2% of the area. But that misconception about just who's using it, and like there's just so many people going from the Pearl District to the art museum every day. That's just not.
How do you think you can alleviate that?
Well, we've invested a lot in research and communication tools about who's using the system. And so when I've talked to elected officials before about this kind of stuff, this stuff like Blue, former Commissioner Steve Novick tried to shut the streetcar down. And so we told him who's using the system, right? Who's benefiting from it. And he flipped overnight just with stats and being able to articulate it, who's actually using the system.
Just building on that, the affordable housing slide and the co-location and usage, and how the three of you partner very closely, so then how do you partner with housing and community services and for housing?
In two ways we do that. So like Reach Community Development is one of our big partners. They actually built us a brake line at Lowell and Bond. So if you go down to the end of the streetcar system, we have a break room there that was built into their affordable housing unit. We give all the tenants free transit, right? We've got partnerships like that kind of all over the place. So we'll support them from a fair structure and make sure their residents have access to it. When it comes to building new stuff, we tend to lean more on the Housing Bureau for that. We'll say, look, we're doing this. Here's an opportunity. You guys should go do that because you don't want me mucking around with that. That answer your question? Okay.
You have a large partnership with TriMet and obviously having miles of tracks throughout Portland. Infrastructurally, has there been any discussion about using TriMet's lines to potentially have larger outreach? And you mentioned there's different sizing of the trains, but has there been any talk about possibly using TriMet's line to expand?
Let me clarify the train. So the track gauge is the same. So we can run on each other's rails. If TriMet was to run on our system, they would smash into our platforms because they're wider, but we don't have that issue. So if we were to run on the MAX system, and actually this is the reason why if you go to the Tillicum crossing, you can't board the streetcar at the same place as the MAX because the width of the station is different. Super annoying. But so the closest I've come to this discussion, and this is where I get in trouble, is if TriMet gets into a tunneling situation through the central city. They're going to tunnel from like Lloyd Center through Goose Hollow. All of a sudden, the MAX lines don't have MAX on them anymore. That would be an opportunity to turn that whole surface area into a streetcar system. So you have the surface circulation, and we could do that pretty quickly overnight. But that would be a big regional discussion about what you want to do with that rail. The TriMet has other ideas about it as well. Start your panel whenever you want.
That's just a big concept. That started on our project on Steel Bridge, remember that, Alice?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Okay, I think it was you. And then
yeah, let's take a couple more, then we'll do a panel.
Okay, has it ever been proposed that the system became free for people?
yes.
Whenever.
I'll give you my honest answer, which is, so TriMet is our biggest funder. If we went free, that would put a lot of pressure on TriMet to also try and go free. And it's the partnership deal of that makes it more challenging. I can think of ways where we could pay for our lost fare revenue, but to try and replace TriMet's fare revenue at a much broader scale is a much bigger conversation. So I think it's eminently feasible to make the streetcar free. I have already thought of ways to do it that would be cost neutral, but I would want to do it in partnership with TriMet from a regional partnership perspective, because I don't think it's fair to them for us to be running around saying, "Hey, we're free, you're not." I don't know, Alan, do you have things you want to add to that? I mean, the fairless, it's just a bigger conversation for you guys than it is for us.
Yeah, it's worth a longer conversation. But, maybe we'll talk about it once.
Okay.
Finish your question.
I'll say on this list, Portland, Tacoma, and Seattle are the only three that charge fares on streetcars. Everybody else is free. And they've done it for different reasons. Some of them, they were poorly built systems that just needed ridership. Some of them was a pandemic move. Some of them have a tax, like Kansas City has got an amazing tax structure, which essentially, I mean, their sales point is like, look, we're taxing you, the businesses along the streetcar line are paying a tax. So every time you buy a cup of coffee, you're buying your streetcar fare. We're good to go. And Kansas City's streetcar has been amazing. The ridership's incredible. So we're open to the conversation, but I would want it to be more of a regional. And I don't want to do it as a gimmick, you know, like I don't really need it from a ridership perspective, but I would like to have more people access the system.
I live in the Northeast, and I live at, take red, green, blue, max, or the streetcar in the direction of the max comes a lot more frequently, so I can jump on the max quicker, but I also like the streetcar comes out of Monte. But I was kind of wondering about the relationship the streetcar has with business owners along its brand and incentive to make them participate. Really even like have a destinations along a streetcar, you know, like as you're passing stations, like, oh look, there's the B sign up right down the street. Get up and turn.
Yeah, we've done a lot of kind of promotional stuff with the businesses, but I would guess I would answer that question more on the, I think we dropped the ball a little bit on the placemaking side on MLK and Grand. We've got just really minimal stations, like they're barely even there, and we don't really celebrate the area that they're around as much as I would have liked. I think we kind of blend into the environment, particularly on MLK and Grand, in a way that if you don't see the streetcar, you don't even know it's there, and our frequencies aren't strong enough to really drive home that imaging. So I think there's more to be done on the east side. The businesses are very aware of the streetcar because they paid for it, and they let me know all the time we have not delivered on the promise that they paid for. And that would be the service. We were supposed to be running every 12 minutes. We're running every 20 right now. They paid their bill, and we haven't been able to fulfill our side. Last one, I think.
I think the ESCO site is a former baseball stadium.
Yeah.
Does the streetcar have any plans on getting the MLB?
No, we're not. We're part of that discussion as a service provider, but not on that site. No.
Good question.
We've been accused of that many times. It's, first of all, let me just say, you would never want to serve the stadium with a streetcar. It doesn't work, right? So Detroit tried this, and it's just so there's so much traffic around the stadium, and so we're also small. Like we're not small, and if you're coming from anywhere besides downtown, you're gonna hate it. So if you're gonna build a massive baseball stadium, it needs to have a light rail system served. So if we're in the neighborhood, we're happy to serve. Alan?
Ideally, it would have a subway or something, because even light rail doesn't carry enough people to make that much.
Ellen, do you want to answer the fair question?
Yeah, the fair thing. So what we have one, just to be clear, you know, I talked about our fares going down with the pandemic and that really hurting our service and our ability to do things. If we went fare free, we would have to cut a lot of service. As far as we can tell, that is worse for equity than going fare free. What we have done is institute the honored citizen fare and make that available with additional funds that came from the state to people who have income below 200% of the poverty level, I believe. So that we essentially have made, depending on how often you ride, between 50% and 78% discount, or 72%, sorry, discounts for people who are lower income and who actually see a problem with the fare. What we see across the industry and in our own surveying is medium to higher income riders, the fare just doesn't matter enough for it to matter to them to really drive ridership. And we need that money to provide more service to give them more frequency. So for us at a regional scale, it doesn't make sense to run fare free unless, you know, if the federal government or the state government or the city or whoever comes in and says, here, you know, take $100 million and stop running fares, we would probably say yes to that. But it doesn't make sense for us to do it on our own at a regional scale. It makes it really hard for one little piece of the system to be that way. I don't know that anybody's ever told you not to do it.
I've never asked, 'cause
Yeah.
I know how that would go. But we had a proposal pretty far along last fall to think about it, and we're negotiating with TriMet and other people about other big moves too. And the relationship and the partnership is more important than the small amount of money we make on fares.
Fundamentally, what we find when we survey our own riders is that almost nobody is telling us that price is a barrier to riding. I think that's largely because of the audience's fare and discounts and fare.
How much? Also, the dentist that been better the last few months. Have they said anything about how much either transportation, routing, or time, or cost is?
I haven't heard that specifically. I mean, anecdotally, although it's changing, it's pretty easy to park downtown right now, and there's not a lot of traffic. So I think until that dynamic changes, and then people have to have this forced, like, I don't want to deal with the traffic, I don't want to pay for parking. I'm gonna use TriMet. I mean, yeah.
It's about trade-offs. What are the costs of traveling? And one of the costs is parking, but many of the other costs are time, frustration, and any intersection, you take off just 5 or 10% of the traffic, and it gets a lot easier to move around.
And you have to be around. You have to be around.
Lots of people are still riding transit, but for different reasons, and it's a different dynamic.
Alan talked earlier about how painful it is to wait for transit. I think the number is people value, or they estimate the time waited for transit at 7 times the actual amount of time it is. So if you just get them on the train, they're fine, but waiting for it drives people insane. I think it was 7 times.
Moving, we have these bus lanes that have been instituted. In some ways, the silver lining of the pandemic for us is all of a sudden we have bus lanes in places that I thought I was going to die before we could convince even the city of Portland, to put in bus lanes, and now we got them all over the place.
We snuck them in.
Yeah, and they save time. They save a minute, but people perceive it as like 5 or 6 or 7 minutes of savings. And I do the same, even though I know how much we're saving. I'm on the Burnside Bridge, riding the bus across it, just looking at the cars and going, oh, this is great.
What if you're on the train and the train is stuck? Is that 5 times versus 7 times? Oh, that's like 20.
Yeah.
Is that 20 times?
That's
If it's stuck and you have no idea why.
No idea
what's
why.
going on. Yeah, it's, who knows what the real number is. but
That
it's
is
high.
about.
Y'all thought about incorporating some leisure into those waiting times, whether that's partnering with like newspaper companies or having recommendations, something like that. I know public transit lines on green.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'll bet you have thought more about that. I know there's been some discussion around it. We have problems with anything on board. Literally anything, like we don't want anything flammable on there. There's enough, there's that one person who's gonna mess with something and ruins it for everybody. Well, that's enough. There's not a lot of like tangible things.
But even at the stations themselves, I would prefer to not highlight that you perceive it to be a long wait for my system to get to you. That makes sense. Like if I have somebody there reading a book because I know it's going to be a half an hour for a train, we're running really bad service. Like
This might be a good time to mention the music.
the mobile music festival. Yeah, we're bringing that back. We have put bands like on the streetcar for like a whole night. We run a music festival. If any of you guys are musicians, let me know. It's been amazing. We just do. Yeah, the trains are completely full. We usually board right over here at the Urban Plaza, and I'll just sit there all night having a beer and watching bands go around. But that's a way for us to get out and have fun on the system, get people to appreciate what's going on. It doesn't help with the wait time, but so and downtown, our trains come every 5 because they're interlined. Our trains come like every 6 minutes downtown. It's pretty good.
I don't know if we touched directly on this. Like, I really enjoy the streetcar. Like, I think part of it is like it doesn't have some of the same like image issues as maybe buses do. But I also know like it can't screw around like incorrectly parked cars, and getting the rail linings expensive? So like, what are the other like benefits to running a streetcar versus a bus?
This probably falls more on the development side of things. One, I mean, the user experience is generally better on rail than it is on bus. So as a customer, you appreciate it more. But what we hear from the development community is the permanence of the whole thing is a major factor in their decision to either just invest at all or invest even more, using more of their zoning, because they feel like the ROI on their project is going to be much stronger if it's along rail. And that's kind of the quid pro quo in our funding model. We usually form local improvement districts with the property owners around the streetcar line. They're paying for it, which means that they need to invest in their land in order to get that money back. And we have a couple of studies that show, people who are building on the streetcar line, there's a metric called floor area ratio, where basically like how much of your zoning do you actually use. If they're on the streetcar line, people are using 100% of their zoning capacity, and it just starts dropping off after about a half mile. It becomes diminished.
And that's part of what, BOT is trying to creep towards some of that feeling of permanence. But a bus, no matter how great our operators are, a bus still has to do this all the time. It's a different experience.
So speaking of cars parked incorrectly in front of the streetcar, what do you do? What do cars do when they're on the same side or the same lane as a streetcar, and you have a streetcar coming behind? Are they supposed to move over?
No. We just run in traffic.
Yeah. It's a big bus when it comes to traffic rules.
Okay.
Now on the transit mall with light rail,
Right.
where you can physically drive there and you're not supposed to, that's a whole different.
So-
That one
so
you're supposed to
the
get
only-
off.
The only time you can't drive on the track is when you see that line.
Or some other kind of marking, if it's colored, if it's got a T on it. Basically, if it's max tracks, don't drive on it. And the reason is a max is the full length of a block. If there's one car in front of the max, we're suddenly blocking the previous intersection.
And you-
Whereas a streetcar is 60 feet long, you can fit that plus, 5 cars in the block. And so,
And you can distinguish between the maps.
yeah, the marking's pretty good, the signage is there.
Well, in downtown, you got the
Usually tell.
like concrete bumps too. Like you'll feel it. If you're driving into a max lane, you should know it.
Plus, the buses on the max will let you know what they're on.
We have that. We talked about that viaduct that's sinking. It's not sinking that fast. You guys are all safe. But we just called out like our drunk driving trap. It's like, I don't know how people do it. You cannot access the thing by car, but without question, once a quarter, somebody ends up extremely drunk on that viaduct. And I don't understand how they get there, how they get as far as they get on there in the first place. Don't do that either.
It has been a number of years, but we have had at least one drunk driver drive through the West Side Tunnel.
I remember that.
I have no.
And they go a long ways.
It's 3 miles long.
I was just wondering, so you touched a little bit about like the trade-off between congestion and transit use. Like how much does TriMet and I guess the streetcar have to do with like sort of regional discussions about tolling and that sort of policy?
For us, we have somebody who is kind of in our government affairs section, who works with Metro and other jurisdictions to track those kinds of things where there is a policy that might affect transit ridership or transit demand. We are involved in the tolling and doing things like trying to convince the state to put in language that allows money from tolls to be spent on things that are supportive of transit. The state constitution does not allow tolls to be spent directly on transit capital.
But the nature of the conversation is if you're going to have tolls, it needs to be avoidable with good transit, right? So
There has to be an option.
that's the sandbox to try to.
I try to get around using my phone if I find bike maps or transit. I have at least 3 different transit apps on my phone: PDX Bus, Transit, and then the Move It. Is there a particular transit app that you all think is the best for Portland? Or you just wait for the train, wait for the bus?
The TriMet answer is TriMet.org. And the reason is, we actually did a fair amount of research and some polling, and there's a lot of app fatigue. And making a fully web or mobile enabled website so that we can run on any platform was the better way to have something that was reliable and consistent. It is, when we first rolled it out, it was kind of slow because there's a lot of data going into it. It feels to me, at least, that it's gotten a lot better in the 8 months since we introduced it. So I point you to where it's at. You know, on my phone, I just went to it and then did the thing where you can save the web link on your home screen, so you go straight to it. Personally, I also sometimes use the transit app. I used to use PDX Bus because I thought it was best, but sometimes it has trouble loading like the closest stops. Yep, yeah, you can do that too.
Yep, and they're all pulling from the same data source. So
In fact, okay, real quick, GTFS, the data source, the data that.
this is not a quick.
general-
This is not a quick story.
Oh, no, just a real quick version. The general transit fee specification, which originally was the Google transit fee specification, was developed in partnership between a TriMet employee and Google. The first place that transit information was available on the web in the world was Portland. 2004, something? I mean, it was a long
That's
time.
great trivia.
The 2006 on the.
Okay.
Fact check.
It was probably in the business plan, which I am the lead author for, so I can.
You were in the ballpark. We better get out of here.
Yeah, I think we're good. I think we're good. Let's give it a round of applause.